September 1967. The Vietnamese called it Con Thien, the Hill of Angels. Just 3 kilometers from North Vietnam, Americans held this barren hilltop to keep an eye on the DMZ. Instead, NVA artillery kept an eye on them. With no cover and nowhere to run, it seemed the Angels actually wanted the American Marines dead. Suddenly, a Marine captain scanning the jungle below Con Thien noticed something through his binoculars. His heart sank. Shadows detached from the trees and advanced in formation. The entire forest floor seemed to open up from hell. His radio crackled to life. He requested an enemy headcount from reconnaissance. The last transmission was simply, quote, "I'd hate to tell you." No wonder the Marines were about to rename it the Meat Grinder. Setting the line. Con Thien, meaning Hill of Angels in Vietnamese, was a strategic U.S. military base located just 3 kilometers from North Vietnam in Quang Tri Province. Originally established as a U.S. Army Special Forces camp in February 1967, it later became a Marine Corps combat base. The small hill offered unparalleled strategic value with its panoramic views, 15 kilometers east of the South China Sea and north into enemy territory. The base formed part of Leatherneck Square, alongside Marine positions at Go Linh, Dong Ha, and Cam Lo. It was intended as a crucial component of the McNamara Line, an ambitious barrier system of barbed wire, minefields, and electronic sensors designed to prevent North Vietnamese infiltration across the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Despite its strategic advantages, Con Thien was exceptionally vulnerable. Stripped of forest cover, the base sat well within range of North Vietnamese artillery positioned across the Ben Hai River. Cleverly concealed in the hills, enemy guns could target the Marines with devastating accuracy. General Vo Nguyen Giap, who had defeated the French in 1954, made destroying Con Thien a priority. Meanwhile, infantry battalions from the 3rd Marine Division rotated through the base, defending what would become known as the Meat Grinder and Our Turn in the Barrel. On February 27, 1967, the People's Army of Vietnam, known to the Americans as the NVA, or North Vietnamese Army, unleashed a fierce bombardment on Con Thien and Go Linh, hammering the positions with mortars, rockets, and artillery. After a brief pause, the shelling resumed with renewed force on March 20th, continuing relentlessly for 2 weeks. On March 24th, the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, launched Operation Prairie 3 and walked straight into a vicious firefight. Southeast of Con Thien, they engaged a dug-in NVA battalion in a fortified bunker complex. After 2 hours of intense combat, the Marines forced the enemy to withdraw, leaving 33 NVA combatants neutralized. In Quang Tri Province's Go Linh district, Company A came under heavy fire at Pha An. Sergeant Walter K. Singleton, positioned safely in the rear, advanced into the danger zone to help evacuate wounded soldiers. Despite suffering mortal injuries, Singleton seized a machine gun and launched a single-handed assault, eliminating 8 enemy soldiers and forcing the rest to retreat. On March 30th, Company 1 of 3 Marines was ambushed while setting a night trap near Hill 70, west of Con Thien. 2nd Lieutenant John Bobo's company was surrounded by a large NVA force. Severely wounded and unable to escape, Bobo ordered his men to fall back while he provided covering fire. Alone and grievously injured, he manned a machine gun and fought off the advancing NVA, neutralizing several attackers and stalling their assault long enough for his men to escape. His sacrifice saved every Marine in his unit, earning him a posthumous Medal of Honor. In April, engineers began the dangerous task of cutting a 200-meter wide swath from Con Thien to Go Linh. Working under constant enemy fire, they managed to clear half the path by April 19th. At 2:55 a.m. on May 8, 1967, the stillness around Con Thien shattered as a green flare arced into the night sky, the signal for assault to begin. Within seconds, over 300 mortar and artillery rounds slammed into the Marine outpost, hammering defensive positions and lighting up the darkness. North Vietnamese sappers moved in swiftly with Bangalore torpedoes, blowing gaps in the perimeter wire. Through these breaches surged 2 full battalions of the 8th 12th Regiment, the 4th and 6th, advancing in a coordinated assault from the northeast and southeast. But Hanoi's commanders had made a critical miscalculation. They expected to face token resistance from South Vietnamese forces or poorly equipped Chinese non-irregulars from the civilian irregular defense groups. Instead, they encountered Alpha and Delta companies of the 1st Battalion, 4th Marines, along with a platoon of Navy Seabees and M48A3 Patton tanks from Alpha Company, 3rd Tank Battalion, 3rd Marine Division. As the first wave broke through the outer perimeter, Marines met them with devastating fire. Automatic rifles tore through the gaps, while grenades exploded in rapid succession. The defenders yielded no ground. Near one burning tank, Sergeant David Danner, despite being struck by RPG shrapnel, refused to withdraw. After pulling wounded crewmen to safety, he climbed the turret and manned the Browning M1919 30 caliber machine gun. Alone, he raked advancing NVA lines, incapacitating multiple assault waves until his ammunition was exhausted. His valor that night earned him the Navy Cross. A Douglas AC-47D gunship, callsign Spooky, provided air support. Its three 7.62mm GAU-2A miniguns, each capable of firing 3,000 rounds a minute, lit up the battlefield. In rotating passes, the gunship blanketed NVA concentrations with suppressive fire while illuminating the area with flares. Under this cover, Marine engineers scrambled to patch breaches in the perimeter. By 5 a.m., the NVA assault had stalled. As commanders pulled their troops back under fire, daylight revealed the battle's toll. Nearly 200 NVA fighters fallen beyond the wire, with 44 Marines lost and 110 wounded, almost a third of the defenders out of action in just hours. The heavy casualties forced General Vo Nguyen Giap to reconsider his tactics. Abandoning massed infantry assaults on fortified positions, he ordered a transition to guerrilla-style engagements, ambushes, infiltration, and artillery harassment. Daring the offensive. 10 days after the assault in Con Thien, American forces launched their counteroffensive. On May 18, 1967, Operation Hickory began, an aggressive multi-division push into the southern DMZ, led by the 3rd Marine Division. The operation commenced with a saturation artillery barrage, targeting entrenched NVA positions near Pho An Village, identified as a staging hub along infiltration routes. As the shelling lifted, tactical airstrikes dropped high explosive ordnance and napalm across the objective zone. At 7 a.m., the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines moved in. They encountered immediate but uneven resistance, with fire teams maneuvering undercover to clear fighting holes and overrun defensive clusters. By day's end, they'd confirmed 29 enemy fighters neutralized and destroyed 75 bunkers, many rigged with booby traps or reinforced with logs and earth. To the southeast, the 2nd Battalion, 26 Marines, entered heavier terrain, encountering layered minefields and tripwire traps that slowed movement to a crawl. Once through these obstacles, they ran into fortified NVA regulars, whose small arms fire, RPGs, and interlocking machine gun positions turned the jungle into a lethal zone. The 2nd fought back with an M48 tank that pushed forward, blasting canister rounds into the tree line. 2 more M48s followed, but both were hit and disabled by RPG-2 fire. The Marines kept moving, leaving 7 behind and pulling a dozen more out under fire. The next day, Operation Bowcharger expanded the assault by inserting additional forces into hot sectors of the DMZ. At Landing Zone Goose, helicopters from HMM 263 flew UH-34D Seahorses into an active engagement zone. NVA machine gun fire tore through the landing zone. One aircraft, despite being hit multiple times during descent, still deployed its troops and escaped. But the Marines on the ground were immediately surrounded. Colonel James A. Gallo Jr., commanding the Special Landing Forces, redirected follow-on landings to Landing Zone Owl, 1 kilometer south. This maneuver avoided another hot landing zone, but left the first wave isolated. By mid-morning, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, reinforced by M48A3 tanks, fought their way to the stranded Marines. The relief force engaged in direct fire combat until air support arrived, A4 Skyhawks delivering napalm, breaking the perimeter and allowing the isolated Marines to link up. By month's end, Operations Hickory and Bow Charger had eliminated 789 NVA personnel and taken 37 prisoners, capturing 187 weapons. Marine casualties stood at 142 fallen and 896 wounded. The operation disrupted enemy movements, but failed to end them. The DMZ remained contested, and more battles loomed for the Marines at Con Thien. Wounded Marines received initial treatment from corpsmen in sandbagged aid stations or bunkers, often while shells landed nearby. Evacuation requests were radioed out with injury details and coordinates, but getting helicopters in was another battle entirely. CH-46 Sea Knights and CH-53 Sea Stallions flew dangerously low to avoid incoming fire, sometimes hovering for fast rope or hoist extractions when landing was impossible. Pilots delivered medical supplies and extracted casualties while under fire, their rotors spinning just feet above cratered ground. When roads were impassable or targeted, combat engineers cleared routes or secured landing zones while taking fire. Ground units sometimes fought their way to wounded men or extraction points, clearing enemy positions as they moved. Smokescreens, artillery suppression, and airstrikes were used to cover medical insertions and extractions. Every flight meant threading through danger zones where a single mistake could prove fatal. Infernal Summer. On July 2, 1967, General Westmoreland launched Operation Buffalo to counter growing North Vietnamese pressure near Con Thien. That same day, Company B, 1st Battalion, 9th Marines, known as the Walking Dead, was caught in an ambush near the DMZ. Alpha and Bravo companies moved northeast through thick jungle toward the zone. Enemy resistance seemed minimal at first. Then it erupted. The NVA had set a deliberate ambush with machine guns and mortars opening fire from camouflaged bunkers and trench lines. Concealed in dense vegetation, they targeted exposed Marines from multiple angles. 2 NVA battalions opened fire with mortars, rockets, and automatic weapons. Within moments, the company commander and 2 platoon leaders were struck down or severely wounded. Staff Sergeant Leon R. Burns, a platoon leader with Company B, immediately took charge. Despite fire from 3 sides, he sprinted through the danger zone, calling in close airstrikes within 50 meters of his position. As the battle intensified, Burns organized scattered Marines into a defensive perimeter, directed suppressing fire, and moved among the wounded to aid evacuations. When a relief force approached, Burns volunteered to guide them forward through artillery barrages on the highway. He moved up and down the column, placing Marines in cover and coordinating the defense. Twice, he braved open fire to drag wounded men to safety, actions that would earn him the Navy Cross. Still, within minutes, Bravo Company was pinned down. The 2nd Platoon's attempt to flank collapsed under intersecting fire as casualties mounted rapidly. With no room to maneuver, the company commander made a high-risk call, requesting close air support with napalm inside friendly lines. The bombs hit just outside their perimeter, breaking the NVA's momentum long enough for the surviving Marines to regroup. Captain Albert C. Slater's Company A had already taken heavy losses north of Con Thien, but worse was coming. Now leading both Companies A and C, Slater positioned his men for the next assault. Just before dusk, the NVA opened with a punishing artillery and mortar barrage. Slater moved through the blast zone, checking every position under fire. When 2 North Vietnamese battalions hit the line, Slater ran between positions, directing artillery and calling in airstrikes while completely exposed. For 6 hours, mortars and grenades rained down as gunfire tore through the brush. Slater led from the front, pushing through the chaos, even as his men engaged in hand-to-hand combat in dense undergrowth. His calm leadership held the line as he coordinated fire, rallied the wounded, and urged his Marines forward. By dawn, over 200 North Vietnamese forces lay fallen, while Slater's units had taken minimal losses. For his relentless courage and command under fire, Captain Slater received the Navy Cross. Pinned down. At dawn on July 5th, reconnaissance flights spotted a major North Vietnamese force crossing the Ben Hai River. Captain Burrell H. Lands climbed a tree for a better view. As the enemy moved closer, He radioed for a headcount. The reply came back, low and tense. The pilot couldn't bring himself to say how many. It was a full NVA battalion, over 400 troops from the elite 90th Regiment, pushing toward Marine lines. Within minutes, 600 heavy artillery rounds slammed into U.S. positions. The perimeter was threatened. U.S. artillery batteries, already zeroed in, fired continuously. Explosions tore through NVA ranks, but sappers, shock troops trained for infiltration and demolition, still broke through in places, hurling TNT and satchel charges at Marines who held their positions. Lands quickly assembled a reaction squad and struck the enemy's exposed flank. During the firefight, an NVA soldier charged directly at him. Grabbing a nearby radio operator's rifle, Lance neutralized the attacker with a single shot. He directed fire, kept the squad moving, and stalled the NVA advance until reinforcements reached the line. His speed and precision caused the assault to collapse before fully breaking through. Meanwhile, First Lieutenant John A. Howell monitored the unfolding disaster from Con Thien's command bunker. Company B was nearing collapse, and Howell volunteered to lead a relief force through enemy fire. As mortars and small arms tore through the area, he guided his men and directed tank fire, keeping the column moving and protecting the flanks. Upon reaching Company B's position, Howell established a defensive perimeter. Spotting 2 Marines trapped beyond the lines, he ran through enemy fire, treated their wounds, and dragged them to safety. When an NVA squad attempted to overrun his right flank, Howell led a counterattack, breaking the assault and rescuing 3 more pinned-down Marines. Despite mortar strikes and road mines that disabled 2 tanks, Howell organized casualty evacuations to a landing zone. Refusing treatment for his own injuries, he ensured all wounded were flown out before returning to the front. On July 7th, Howell was mortally wounded in a rocket attack. His actions had saved numerous lives and held the line in one of Operation Buffalo's bloodiest engagements, earning him posthumous honors. By July 14th, Operation Buffalo ended. Marine Corps reports listed 1,290 NVA fighters neutralized and significant equipment captured. Marine losses were heavy, 159 fallen and 345 wounded. The exhausted line. Operation Kingfisher began on July 16th, just 2 days after Operation Buffalo concluded. Its objective was to destroy NVA fortifications threatening Marine positions north and west of Con Thien. The terrain was brutally challenging. Dense jungle, thick mud, and monsoon rains that the NVA used to their advantage. The 812th NVA Regiment had established layered defenses across the hills, bunkers embedded in slopes, trench networks reinforced with logs and hidden firing positions, all concealed by the jungle canopy and protected by booby traps. Marines had to close to within meters of enemy bunkers and clear them by hand. Artillery and mortar fire were constant, targeting every movement to inflict casualties, slow advances, and diminish morale. Rain transformed trails into rivers of mud. Troops waded waist-deep through it, struggling to keep weapons functional and prevent trench foot, a painful condition leading to swelling and blisters. Vehicles bogged down, supplies were delayed, and sleep came in short, wet intervals. From July through October, Marines conducted relentless search and destroy missions, relying heavily on artillery and air support. Bombardments cleared paths through bunker complexes, but ground units still had to finish the job. Every assault brought new casualties as close-range firefights erupted frequently. Despite losing 340 Marines with many more wounded, the operation inflicted devastating damage on the NVA, with enemy casualties estimated at nearly 2,000. Yet the battle lines barely shifted. By late summer 1967, Con Thien was under near-constant artillery fire. Holding the McNamara line, a fortified barrier of sensors, mines, and wire along the DMZ, had become a full-scale combat operation. Combat engineers from the 11th Engineer Battalion, along with detached Seabees, worked to build and maintain it under siege conditions. Enemy shelling made construction nearly impossible. Bulldozers and roam plows, clearing fields of fire, drew immediate attacks from NVA artillery north of the Benhai River. Work often occurred only at night, under smoke cover, or during brief lulls in fire. Seismic and acoustic sensors were regularly destroyed by shelling or compromised by NVA sappers, requiring repair teams to operate under sniper and mortar fire, with M42 Dusters and infantry providing limited protection. Engineers fought constantly to prevent defenses from collapsing as monsoon rains turned the red earth into sucking mud that destroyed bunkers and trenches. They reinforced positions using pierced steel planking, timber, and sandbags hauled in by 6x6 trucks and LVTP-5s along roads regularly cratered or mined. Route 561, a narrow dirt road from Cam Lo to Con Thien, served as the base's critical lifeline. But NVA artillery and mines made every convoy run hazardous. Marine engineers kept the road functional with bulldozers, plows, and M48 tanks, filling craters and clearing mines while under threat. Convoys moved during lulls, often at dawn, protected by infantry and shielded by smoke, counter-battery fire, and air cover from F-4 Phantoms and A-4 Skyhawks. When Route 561 became impassable, helicopters provided the only supply route. CH-46 Sea Knights and CH-53 Sea Stallions from MAG-16 delivered rations, ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. Pilots dropped loads quickly from low altitude, hovering over bunkers or sling loading into tight landing zones. Salvos of autumn. The shelling intensified throughout September 1967, with Con Thien hit daily by over 200 artillery rounds. On September 25th alone, more than 1,200 shells rained down on the hilltop. Between September 19th and 27th, over 3,000 rounds struck the base. Marine artillery responded with 12,577 rounds. Navy ships fired 6,148 more, and over 5,200 Marine and USAF air sorties struck NVA positions. Marines nicknamed the outpost the meat grinder. One Marine described the situation bluntly, quote, "You'd have to build the zone all the way to India, and it would take the whole Marine Corps and half the Army to guard it. Even then, they'd probably burrow under it." A CBS correspondent described Con Thien as, quote, "the least defensible of any American outposts because it's so close to the big guns of the North Vietnamese." The reporter noted that, quote, "Con Thien was a poor place to defend because the Marines can't move out to attack." During the monsoon season, resupply became extremely difficult. Marines quickly adapted to the constant threat of NVA sapper attacks. These elite demolition troops infiltrated the base at night, planting explosives on bunkers and supply routes. Initially caught off guard, the Marines reinforced the perimeter with layers of concertina wire, expanded minefields, and added patrols aided by floodlights. Night vision devices, though rudimentary, helped during the hours when sappers were most active. To confuse the enemy, loudspeakers mounted on tanks broadcast false troop movements, while dummy positions were set up to lure sappers into ambushes. Coordination between infantry and engineers was crucial. Marines reacted swiftly to explosions, securing areas while engineers repaired breaches. Artillery fire created suppressive barriers over suspected infiltration routes. Though the threat never fully disappeared, the Marines became increasingly adept at detecting and responding to infiltration attempts, strengthening defenses and reducing the effectiveness of sapper attacks over time. During Operation Kingfisher on September 21st, Lance Corporal Jed Colby Barker's platoon was ambushed by North Vietnamese forces in the western Leatherneck Square. As the platoon sought cover, Barker laid down relentless suppressing fire, holding back the enemy. When a grenade landed in their defensive position, Barker didn't hesitate. He threw himself on the grenade, shielding his comrades. In the early hours of October 14th, 1967, Sergeant Paul H. Foster was serving as Artillery Liaison Operations Chief with 2nd Battalion, positioned defensively near a key bridge between Con Thien and Cam Lo. Without warning, the Marines were hit by a brutal mortar and artillery barrage, immediately followed by a fierce ground assault. North Vietnamese troops broke through the perimeter and poured fire directly into the battalion command post. Despite the chaos and his exposed position in the Fire Support Coordination Center, Foster refused to withdraw. Even after being wounded by an exploding enemy grenade, he continued to direct mortar and artillery fire onto the advancing enemy. His calm under pressure helped stabilize the defense as the enemy closed in. Then, another grenade landed among Foster and 5 other Marines. He shouted a warning, threw his armored vest onto the grenade, and threw himself on top of it. The blast tore through his body. For his sacrifice, he, like Barker, received the Medal of Honor. Fallen Angels. The shelling campaign finally eased in October, but the scars remained. Operation Kingfisher and the bombardment of Con Thien had left hundreds fallen, thousands wounded, and everyone changed. The NVA hadn't broken the line, but the Marines had paid for every yard. In early 1968, the focus of the war shifted southwest to the Marine Corps outpost of Khasan, easing pressure on Con Thien. The relentless shelling that had battered the hill for months finally ceased, though occasional skirmishes still erupted near the DMZ. At Khasan, a different style of battle emerged. The North Vietnamese waged a siege, surrounding the base, cutting off ground access and hammering it with artillery for months. Marines held out through constant air resupply and B-52 strikes, trapped in a static, high-casualty standoff with no defined front line. While at Con Thien, the Marines faced near-daily shelling and infiltration while trying to hold the McNamara line. Platoons were rotated every 30 days to prevent total breakdown, but the grind ensured each unit took losses. The pace of casualties at Con Thien rivaled and at times exceeded that of Khasan, without the media spotlight or dramatic siege narrative. The McNamara line, which had cost so much to defend, proved ineffective. North Vietnamese forces tunneled beneath it, moved through gaps at night, or bypassed it entirely via Laos. Critics in the Pentagon and commanders on the ground called it a costly illusion, technologically ambitious but tactically flawed. Instead of stopping infiltration, it pinned U.S. forces to exposed outposts like Con Thien, drawing heavy casualties for limited gain. But in those exposed positions, Marines were forced to adapt under fire, and that hard-earned flexibility may have been what ultimately kept them alive.